Internets, welcome to the Sultan and Sneakers podcast and YouTube channel. And welcome back if you are a viewer or a listener already. Today's interview is with Richard Spencer, the founder of the alt-right. Richard became known in 2016 with the election of Donald Trump and subsequently his leading a rally about a week after the election where he was being seen giving or encouraging Nazi salutes, as the media would portray it. He was also a speaker at the Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville, Virginia, which I think a couple people were killed. And that was the incident where the car ran over a woman there. So yeah, the question is always like, Maheen, why would you engage someone like Richard Spencer? And here's the bottom line. This channel, Sultans and Sneakers, is about exploring worldviews, belief systems, wherever they come from, even if I would disagree. And I take each interview as a case by case scenario. And I certainly was curious in understanding Richard's worldview and how he came to that worldview. At the same time, I've been made aware of the past year or so that Richard Spencer of 2021 or 2020 is not the same Richard Spencer of 2016. And I wanted to offer him the opportunity to kind of clarify some of his points. I will say that this is not a person I necessarily pursued. I don't necessarily go and scout out every interview. That's something that as I've done over 200 and some interviews now between this channel and the Mad Mamluks and other projects that I've worked on in the past, oftentimes these opportunities just come to me. And so what happened was that a group of Muslims have actually been engaged with Richard over the past year or so, kind of having some dialogue, some shared commonalities. Those individuals don't necessarily have a media or blog or anything like that. They're just, a group of Muslims who, noticed that Richard was actually speaking positively about Islam and Muslims on his own YouTube channel, which has now been banned. So I was made aware of that. It's not something that's necessarily commonly known in the media or on social media. There's probably a reason for that, to be honest. It seems like there's part of this, there's maybe some kind of agenda to keep portraying Richard Spencer as the 2016 version. My conversation with him I thought was quite engaging, and I think that I enjoyed it. I hope to probably dialogue with him again in the future, whether that's offline or online. And at the end of the day, I believe that engagement like this is going to be productive, and it's going to, at the end of the day, reduce things like what happened in New Zealand at Christchurch 2 years ago. So with that being said, I know some people will disagree with me giving him a platform or doing this interview. At the same time, I know many are encouraged by this kind of endeavor. So wherever you sit, I respect the decision. I respect your opinion. It's not like I realize that this is something that may not be popular, but it's in my gut. I felt like it was something that I wanted to do. It was a conversation that, again, I enjoyed. And I certainly would welcome the opportunity to do more, endeavors like this with both Richard and people who think a similar way, or even people who disagree. If anyone would like to counter some of his points and, be someone that I could engage with on the channel, kind of flesh some of those ideas out, I'd be more than welcome. They'd be more than welcome to come on my channel and have that kind of discussion. With that being said, hope you guys enjoy the interview. Internets, welcome back to another episode of Sultans and Sneakers. I'm your host, as always, Maheen the podcaster. And on today's show, I am real excited to have Richard Spencer, editor of Radix Journal, on. Richard, obviously, many of you guys know him from the alt-right and 2016 post-Trump. Richard, first of all, thanks for coming on the show, man.
Thanks for having me. I'm really excited about the conversation.
Yeah, I was juiced about it. And like we were talking offline, I want to make it up front for listeners out there. This isn't going to be a combative kind of conversation. I think people, my platform's not about that. You people who listen to the show, watch the show, have known that I've brought people from different viewpoints on. You are no different. I would treat you like I treat someone I'm having a cup of coffee with, right? So, and certainly, hopefully, we can have a fruitful conversation, exchange some ideas, kind of get to know you a little bit, and go from there. But starting off for you,
Definitely.
man. So yeah, you became well known in 2016 when Trump won, and you guys had the that little, I guess, that little, like, looked like a party, where you had the, hail Trump,
Oh, the
hail
Hail
my
Trump,
people.
Hail
Yeah,
Everything. Yeah.
right. You had
I'll never
that's
live that one down, I don't think.
you know but I wanted to kind of, like, as I was doing my research on you, listening to older content. I know you come from like a traditional Republican family, pretty well to do, from growing up in Texas.
Yeah.
But I could never pinpoint the time where you figured out, like, because you identify yourself as an identitarian, right? Is that correct?
Yes. More or less. I don't really have a label at this point. I'm just
Okay.
me.
Okay.
I'm in search of a new label, you want to say.
Mm. So, like, but, like, just so people can, because I got to cover some history at least.
Sure,
Do you
sure.
remember, like, a turning point? Because I know you've mentioned you've had, like, an Asian girlfriend in the past. Um, you
Sure.
went to, like, but then you go to UVA, Mr. Jefferson's, university,
Right.
um, which I think has this very, like, waspy vibe to it, at least from an outsider's point
Yeah.
of view. I don't know if that's
Yeah.
accurate or not. Um, but, like,
Yeah.
do you yeah, well, you watch a UVA football game, and I went to Ohio State, right? And so we're,
Mm-hmm.
like, kind of grungy, hoodies,
Mm-hmm.
sweats in the stands. You watch a UVA game, I think I saw someone in a blazer and a shirt and a tie.
Oh yeah. Wearing a blue blazer and orange tie. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Um,
Or a prom dress, maybe in the stands.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So with that, like, do you remember a time where it just clicked for you? I was like, this identity thing is it right now, even though you don't believe, you might not affiliate with that right now. Do you
Right. Well,
remember?
it wasn't about identity. I think it was really about radical philosophy. And I think I came to something like identitarianism through that. Um, yeah, I did have a privileged background and wonderful childhood that I'm proud of. I went to great schools. I had great teachers. I could have taken a path and become a lawyer, followed in my father's footsteps and become a doctor or something like that. But I don't know. I guess I had a little bit of a splinter in my mind, and I felt that there was something wrong with the world, you could say, and I wanted to really understand what that was, and I wanted to fix it. So I didn't come to my views by being concerned about illegal immigration or something like this, like from a conservative standpoint. I did come to care about these issues through really philosophy, radical philosophy, I would say.
Okay, so it's more like reading. Is that something you got into undergrad? Because you did your undergrad at Virginia and then a master's
Yeah,
at Duke, somewhere along those
I did a
lines.
master's at U of C actually, and then
Oh, okay.
I was in a doctoral program at Duke, and then I actually dropped out of that.
Okay.
So that's my story. Yeah, I mean, I think it was I I had a pretty standard kind of high school experience. I played on the football team, played on the baseball team, really mediocre at both, maybe even sub mediocre at baseball, I have to say. But pretty normal. I think it was when I was in my early 20s that I started seriously reading things like the classics. I was reading the translation, but things like reading Plato and so on. I studied a lot. I was an English major, so I studied a lot of Shakespeare. I also studied music history, and I got into that. And I was just fascinated by it. I think my ultimate turning point probably was reading Nietzsche and just feeling like my mind was kind of shattered by that experience of just reading someone who is challenging me at every level. And I think I resonated with it as well, but I think it was more about really challenging things. So I just got to a point where I, particularly as a young person, I was addicted to this stuff. I would just throw myself in to, thinking about Wagner, reading Nietzsche, studying Plato, all this kind of stuff. It just really appealed to me. And I did feel like I wanted to address the world in the most radical way possible. And by radical, I mean in a good way. When you hear radical, you probably think like throwing Molotov cocktails or whatever. That's not what I'm talking about. I mean radical, getting to the root of the matter.
Sure.
And understanding the world on a fundamental level. And I had a bit of a bohemian streak to me as well. I was like traveling around Europe, living in hostels, and no money, and doing all that kind of stuff. So this was kind of my my trajectory.
Interesting.
As a young person.
Yeah, I was a philosophy major for about a year, and I realized it wasn't for me because it would take me like 2 hours to read like 10 pages of The Cave.
Right.
And I was like,
that's good.
I can't get it. And when I studied the University of Toronto for a couple of years before I came back to Ohio to go to school, and my professor was one of like the world experts on Plato, I remember, but I knew that, but I couldn't get into it. For the layman who doesn't understand Nietzsche, I mean, most people know the quote Nietzsche, "God is dead," right? That's him, right? Can you break down general, like what his philosophy is about?
Sure. I mean, that's a tall order.
Okay.
I'll just start with the "God is dead" quote. I mean, I think it's a very misunderstood quote because it's usually taken in a kind of teenage way, almost like a YouTube atheist, God is dead, give me the keys to the car this weekend, Dad, kind of way, which isn't, I guess, entirely wrong, but is certainly far from the truth. Nietzsche viewed this as a major tragedy. I mean, God is dead and we killed him. But even that has a kind of ironic layer to it, in the sense that it was, I mean, the origins of Christianity are one thing, but what Christianity became in the European mind was you could say, overvaluation of the truth. It was a truth at any cost, including one's self and one's world, one's social world. And so, I mean, you can see these, sections in a book like Beyond Good and Evil, where it's, figures like Copernicus were valuing truth and using reason to ultimately shatter their social world that had been established. And it's this kind of shattering that gives, you could say, the European world a certain kind of dynamism. But you have to recognize where we are. That whole legacy of Christianity had some very bad effects, I think, on the world. But it ultimately did give give European man a certain kind of overvaluation of truth, where if you were even pursuing the to kill God, as it were, you were kind of lit by the same lamp as the monk, in this kind of ironic fashion. Now, Nietzsche also did a genealogy of where these ideas are ultimately coming from. And you can see that in a book, which might be the first book you should read if you're delving into Nietzsche, The Genealogy of Morality. And his view basically is that there was a transition from a concept of good and bad to good and evil. And for a dominating class, an aristocratic class that is able to command and conquer, what is good? Well, we're good. What's good? I don't want to go all Conan here, but what is good in life? Listening to the lamentation of their women or something like that. Sure. And what is bad? Bad is being sick or weak, being low. And bad is being, they would associate this even with colors. Bad is black or dark. You can even see this a little bit in language. Even some, the word villain actually even kind of derives from village, interestingly, but you can actually see this in like contemporary English, where we have two words for uh, things that most languages just have one. So you can see this particularly in culinary matters. So you eat beef, you raise a cow. You would eat poultry, you would raise a chicken.
Sure.
You would eat mutton, you would raise a lamb. And that is a curious aspect of this, of what the English language is, but it actually has a class dynamic
Okay.
where the Germanic word is cow or kue. The Germanic word is the actual animal that's being raised, whereas the aristocratic word is the French word, which is actually brought to us by French-speaking Normans. So there's a kind of class dynamic within language, and Nietzsche looked through, all of this, and what he saw basically was this major transition in world history with the Jews in the Roman Empire. And this was, as he vividly describes it, a slave morality. It was a morality not one that is given to us by aristocrats, that says basically we are good. Being vigorous and powerful is good, but it's actually a morality that was given to us from below, and it operated in its own kind of quest for power by creating a conscience and to make that blonde beast hate himself. And it involved a full reversal of the concept in good and evil. And so the master became evil. The master who once defined good became redefined as evil. So therefore, being strong is bad. Kicking ass is evil. Whereas being good is being homely and meek. And the meek shall inherit the earth. And so whatever positive qualities might have been brought in to Europe with Christianity. And I think Nietzsche would agree with the statement that even developing that conscience was a kind of deepening or kind of complication of the European, that he kind of hated himself, but maybe you could say became more interesting and more ambivalent and complex. That being said, there is a tremendous baggage that is brought in when we adopt what is ultimately slave morality. And that is when we are valuing the meek, doing this turn, which was unique to that age of anxiety and the late Roman Empire, of feeling like this whole system is under attack and kind of collapsing, the Roman Empire itself, and engaging in this kind of universalism and individualism of, you're neither Greek nor Roman, man nor woman, you're one in Christ. And that kind of turn, which I think ultimately eventuated into liberalism as we know it, in which we are kind of all one, but all one in a different way, in the sense of we're all individuals in this kind of one body.
Yeah.
So
real quick,
I think,
so Nietzsche,
yeah.
what was his context, like time and place that he was
Mid to late
writing?
19th century. He died in 1900.
Okay. And he lived where?
Well, he lived all over Europe. He considered himself a European. He attended a Prussian boarding school.
Yeah.
But did major writing in Turin, did major writing in Switzerland. I actually visited a little boarding house where he wrote Beyond Good and Evil. Actually, it was a gorgeous place. But he was a kind of like a brilliant young professor, and then he wrote his first book, and he was just kind of rejected. Not successful in his lifetime, and kind of roaming about Europe. Maybe one of the world's successful incels, perhaps.
You mentioned something you said just triggered a thought, and I want to kind of explore it a little bit. I don't know if it's going to go anywhere, but could you make an argument? Would you make the argument that the rise of Protestantism in Europe, like Protestantism specifically, led to this liberalism that you're talking about? Because it seems to me, as an outsider who studied a little bit of Christianity, I felt like the Catholic Church and the Eastern Orthodox Church had the structure, the tradition, and the Protestants stripped everything and kind of gave people this individual, oh, this relationship is me and God. I don't need to like,
Right.
I just go to the Bible directly,
Right.
and
I think I know where you're going, and I hear a lot of this from trad Catholic types.
okay.
I don't think I don't think you're that wrong. I mean, I would say that as I was mentioning, I think the origins of liberalism and ultimately nihilism, what we're talking about, go back much deeper. I would blame Judaism and the early Christianity, true Judeo-Christianity for this thing. Protestantism, I think is it I think it has, again, Protestantism shatters it, like inherently, there's new sects or things like that. I think it has, like that, it has different kind of strands to it. And so I agree that unquestionably the Catholic Church and the Orthodox Church, they're more established churches. They were in some way a kind of more aristocratic church. That kind of dangerous idea of Protestantism that you can approach the text on your own can give birth to all sorts of goofiness. Like, I remember seeing, when I was in Texas one time, seeing these big T-shirts of like, I got a direct line with God, and he's Jesus is my best friend, and that kind of stuff. It kind of leads to that. I think there's also a nationalistic element to the Protestant revolution, you could say, in the sense of a kind of Northern Europe that was developing, maybe more slowly, kind of reacting against Roman dominance. So I'm rather ambivalent about Protestantism. I mean, I was raised as a Episcopalian, and so we're kind of a full expression of Protestantism's kind of contradictions, because we didn't get rid of any of the aesthetics of Catholicism. I'm not sure what Episcopalians believe. We might believe in dressing up nice on Sunday.
It's funny you mentioned. I have a previous guest. He's an Episcopalian. He grew up in Episcopalian in Georgia, and he's explaining to me. And you have a different take, but that the Episcopalians are kind of like the Anglicans of America. And
literally they are.
That's what it is, right? And it's like, they pretty much are the only reason they broke off the Catholic Church, like King Henry kept killing his wives or something, and they something, and then
he wanted to get a divorce, but I think there was also a kind of English assertion of national identity with that, of we don't, hey, Pope, you're not going to tell us what to do, like we're tough guys here, and kind of creating its own national church. So I think in terms of the Protestant Reformation, I think there are a lot of twists and turns, and it kind of unleashed a lot of different elements. I mean, on one level, from a kind of Nietzschean standpoint, Protestantism led to the withering critique of Christianity, because that bringing the text to the people in the vulgar language, and going back to the text itself, lends itself to the high criticism, textual criticism that you saw across the 19th century, particularly in Germany, interestingly. And I think it kind of led to that critique, long-term critique, that ultimately led to a lot of the atheism we have today. Now, of course, I can kind of, in a way, consider monotheism to be kind of inherently atheistic, in the sense of, when even in like Genesis, to go back to like the very heart of it, in announcing that there is this one God that made the world, and he put lamps in the sky and so on. It is about killing other gods, and monotheism itself is a kind of radically intolerant religion that I think leads to atheism, in the sense that the Roman system can tolerate other deities and kind of subordinate them into a broader system, where you can recognize the other in some ways, recognize their gods, recognize that there are many layers to this universe we live in. Monotheism is kind of inherently atheistic in the sense that it is about destroying all gods, calling it idolatry, but ultimately destroying all other gods and ultimately becoming a universal planetary oneness. And with the influence of Platonism and Christianity, we ultimately turned this God who wasn't originally like this. We turned this God into this kind of abstract good. If there is some universal, limitless, infinite being who created the universe, he by nature is good, and all of this kind of stuff. But we kind of stripped away the Judaic elements in many ways from that God, and we're kind of worshiping this abstract entity. Well, this is kind of a version of atheism. I mean, it's Richard Dawkins more or less worships the same God as William Lane Craig or all these supposed theists who he talks to. They all worship this abstract good liberal deity and up there somewhere, and so they are, Richard Dawkins is a kind of Christian. He is correct when he says he's a cultural Christian. He's a deeply Christian figure. I think new atheism is kind of a next stage of Christianity, you could say.
Do you think it kind of depends on how you define God? Because, for example, you have this idea in Christianity. I think in First John or like one of the epistles is like God is love, right?
Right.
So then if you start attributing an attribute like love to God, like not God is loving, but is love, it's like a different thing, right? And then you start talking about, well, what about all the evil? Like, so people's rebuttal is like, okay, so let's say I'm talking to an atheist, and he'll say something like, well, I don't believe that there's a God because of all the evil in the world.
Right.
And I'm like, my question to you is like, well, what does that have to do about the existence of God? What if God just wants to tear shit up? I mean, to me, that's a different argument kind of thing. But I see where you're going. Like, a certain train of thought can lead you in a certain way where it's all positive, and then you don't like.
Well, when they say, I think actually this was a line in the movie Batman v Superman, which is that Lex Luthor says, "If God is all powerful, and then he cannot be all good." And if he is all good, he cannot be all powerful. He says something to that effect. And it is a kind of atheistic argument of how is this being everywhere and all powerful, and yet he allows, my child to suffer from cancer or something like this. How could he do that? How could he even allow the kind of iniquities and violence that we see even in your local park where a dog goes and eats a squirrel or something? I don't know. And it is actually a good question, but I think it presumes this notion of God as something like love or the word or this all good infinite being out there, whereas that would be a totally foreign concept to someone in the ancient world pre-Christianity. This is the ultimate influence of Platonism. Nietzsche, again, one of his also famous lines is Christianity is Platonism for the masses. It kind of ultimately created a kind of Platonic system that could appeal to the people in a way that Plato's dialogues certainly could not.
So would you say that, like, so just to understand this, in the Roman Empire, their concept of God, they would have their all good God, and then they would have they wouldn't have that. Okay,
absolutely.
Okay.
You think Zeus is all good?
No, I thought it would be like something where you have an all good God and all evil God, and they fight each other kind of thing. No, it's not like that. Okay,
that's Egyptian. Yeah, kind of. I don't know enough about Egyptian religion to say that. No, absolutely not. I mean, the Greek system, which the Romans adopted, the gods are, you could say, superhuman. I mean, Zeus is great and so on, but Zeus and the other gods kind of have their quibbles and their battles, and they get into it with one another. And Zeus is great, but he might also have to ravish Hera on the ground. This bothered Plato very much.
I actually did. I wasn't expecting to even get into this kind of conversation, but since we're here, it's kind of fun. But like, what would you? Because
I think they express truly human. The gods express intensifications of human qualities, and you could even say racial qualities in the sense of a expression of a people or something like that. But yeah, Aphrodite is, lust, but also love and beauty and seduction and so on. Zeus is a father figure. Apollo might be the greatest, is that he is a god of intelligence, but also a god of music. Athena is also a god of wisdom, and so on. Mars has his weaknesses as a war god who just wants to fight, kind of the god of football or something like you could. I mean, I don't. That kind of sounds cheap, but I think this is a religious experience that people in the ancient world would have. And I think it lends itself to kind of all the bounteous pleasures and violence and beauty and horrors of life itself.
Interesting. You had mentioned about the whole Genesis, how you're the supreme God and there can be no other gods.
Right.
So when you think about I guess the universe and how it came to the Judeo-Islamic version of God, and I specifically left out Christianity, because I think that the Christian version of God, when you talk about Jesus incarnate, does not mesh with the Judeo-Islamic version. I think the Judeo-Islamic God is a very transcendent being kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
So that's the whole that's our essentially our worldview comes from this cosmological argument that that William Lane Craig actually talks about, that for the universe must have come from something, right? That otherwise you have
why
this
do we assume that?
I think it's because in everything else in life you see some kind of effect,
cause and effect.
Yeah, you see cause and effect.
That's just in your brain.
So would you then go as far as to say that everything
can't prove that? It's just in your mind.
No, I mean
that cause and effect.
I mean, think about the idea of good. Even we only know things by it, things by its opposite, right?
Right. Yes.
I mean, without evil, you wouldn't know good. Everything.
Yeah.
What would you call if everything is great? And then there's these arguments. I wasn't trying to make this an atheist versus the monotheistic debate. I was trying to explore some ideas, because it just, these are the questions that we I've never, me personally, I've never had I guess doubt. I haven't thought about it, but some of the stuff wrecks your, like you said, it makes my head hurt. But
sure,
it's kind of obviously you've thought about some of these things. So just to wrap this point up is that because I want to get into some other stuff. I wasn't gonna.
Yeah.
I don't want to do a Richard Spencer interview when it's all about religion.
Right. I think it's good. It's good.
In some ways, but you talked in the past about being a cultural Christian, and then some people on the right were like, well, Spencer isn't really a conservative because he's not a real Christian. And clearly you're not, right? From the conversation we're having here. When you went back to the coining the term the alt-right, is that you that coined it, or was that somebody else?
Yes.
That was you.
That was me. Yes.
Do you think in retrospect it was a mistake to use the term right, because it automatically put people in this framework that it's some semblance of conservatism?
It might have been. I don't have huge regrets about things. I don't want to let things burden me, but I do want to look back at the past and try to learn from it, kind of critique myself, try to go deeper, think about the future, and so on.
Yeah.
But yeah, I when I first started talking about the alt-right, I think it might have actually even been 2008. It was basically a kind of big tent for people who were not neoconservatives or George W. Bush supporters. And it was it was maybe an attempt at a new beginning of, let's look at what went wrong. I mean, I was from, as an undergraduate throughout the 2000s, I mean, I was very much against Bush and the wars and all that stuff. And it was kind of let's think about what went wrong. Let's start a new beginning here. And I would probably include in this big tent or grab bag, you could say, anti-war libertarians and, kind of some secular right people who were against, Bush and the wars, and kind of also the racialism that I was pushing towards as well. I mean, I was kind of like, let's try to bring this together. This is an interesting thing. And the big problem really is the conservative movement. And, we need to remember, I mean, the conservatives complain about cancel culture. I mean, for God's sake, I mean, these people were canceling anyone who like mildly sniffed at George W. Bush or Paul Wolfowitz. I mean, they were absolutely hardline in codifying their movement in a very terrible way. And so I wanted to kind of start again. And I took my own journey with that. I started alternativeright.com in 2010. And, the rest is history, I guess. But yeah, I mean, I do wonder if calling it even right was a problem, because two things. First off, I feel like all the dissident right, as they now call themselves, or whatever they want to call themselves, still the alt-right, basically. I think they have also come around to a lot of non-libertarian economic policies where you hear a lot of them say, yeah, we need $2,000 a month. UBI is interesting. We might even want national health care. Like, you see that happening. And that is certainly going against conservative orthodoxy. But on the other hand, they have basically, I have failed in ideological leadership, in the sense that the dissident right or alt-right of old, they are basically a bunch of extreme conservatives, effectively. And they want conservatism, but more so. We need more Trump. We need more. CPAC isn't hardcore enough. And they're literally and figuratively banging outside the doors of CPAC, wanting to get in. And I do think this is absolutely wrong. And I still am now, and I was then certainly pushing towards an independent position and a new foundation. I don't think, again, that has not worked with most of the movement. It's worked with people I collaborate with, but that's a small group. Most of the movement wants to be right-wing, racist Republicans. And they have this temptation or semblance of power that way, in the sense of rooting on the right, rooting on the conservatives. We just need to get more hardcore. Let's get DeSantis and Coulter on the ticket next time, and blah, blah, blah. This stuff leads nowhere. And so I do think that, if I am able to find a new label, it probably would not include the word right in it.
You should have, if you said alt left, it would have like pissed the liberals off.
That would have pissed them off more, yes.
But you mentioned like,
maybe it would have been better strategically.
Because here's the thing, right? Right now, it was really, when I was preparing for this interview, it's like really hard to find like recent information on you, because it's like the media just purposefully leaves all the 2016 stuff up there, and anything recent. I know your YouTube or something got taken down. I'm allowed to say that, yes. Right? It's not
all of it got purged. I'm still on Twitter, but I got purged from YouTube. Even that, once we were at the point where we were really developing a great audience, and I got taken down in July or something like that, with no strikes or any kind of, TOS violation. It was a complete BS. And there have been some articles. I don't think I'm quite useful to them. I mean, I do think that there was a certain fascination with me because I was interesting. I mean, in the sense, if I say so myself, I was excited about the Trump phenomenon, but I would say things that were provocative and provoking and multi-layered. And so, and there was this kind of Richard Spencer fascination. Who is he? And so on. That brought back such blowback in the sense of deplatforming, even like physical attacks, et cetera, that it just can't go on. I mean, it is very serious. And I think kind of morally speaking, I didn't want to continue on that because I want to, save my soul, as it were. I recognize that the Trump phenomenon wasn't just failed, as a lot of people will say, where it's like, oh, well, he didn't really implement immigration reform or whatever. I viewed it as fundamentally toxic. And it was, I never foresaw something like January 6th, but I did foresee the fact that the Trump train led only to Crazy Town, and it led only to a personality cult of this vulgar, bombastic buffoon, and it led to nothing in the way of actually improving people's lives. And I think it is very toxic, and I think the racism quality to it is one of the toxic elements. The fact that he's viewed as this fascist or white nationalist or white supremacist or whatever, and he'll tweet out something about, oh, the rats are infesting Baltimore, or Detroit is a voter, there's voting fraud in Detroit. All this just race baiting stuff, I think, is very toxic, because it really brings out the worst in all of us. It doesn't get at the real point. And it doesn't offer any kind of future vision of what we want the world to be like. And, I like Trump, 2015, 2016 Trump, the guy denouncing George W. Bush, the guy kind of saying, I'm going to take care of everyone. The liberals are liars. It's a rigged system. We're going to rig it on behalf of Americans. This was all very positive, nationalistic stuff, but very, very, very positive. And he was kind of a chaos agent. He was shaking things up. New things seemed possible. But I would say I recognized earlier than most. I mean, liberals always told me this, that he was a liar and he's toxic, but I should have listened. But I did recognize pretty early that this was toxic and that this is going to lead to madness. It's going to lead to just denial of reality and engaging in the most buffoonish coup d'etat anyone has ever seen in world history. I mean, it does actually, or QAnon as the most. I mean, QAnon dwarfs the alt-right by legions. I mean, 1,000 times more popular. It leads to this type of lunacy. And I mean, again, I probably would have been more deplatformed than I am, but I probably would have been kind of more of a cheerleader, kind of more popular, you could say, if I just stayed on the Trump train and keep fighting. But that's just not me. That's not why I got into this. It's not what ultimately interests me.
I want to give you an opportunity to give some clarification here, because you're throwing around the word of racist accusatorially towards others, right? And people, when they see you, they think, again, it's like alt-right, white national. They go on your Wikipedia,
right?
Neo-Nazi, all this stuff,
right?
So please explain to the listeners and viewers, like, what you like. Have your views changed? Because I remember 2016. What you says Trump appeal. What Trump's appeal was, and this is something that I understood actually as even a non-white person, is that, like, because it would annoy the hell out of me when I'd meet like a white guy with like white guilt, right? It was nauseating, right? But like, but you met like people who like said like, well, he sticks up for us. He's reaching out to the blue collar factory worker in Ohio, Michigan, Indiana. I used to work in a steel mill in Indiana, right? I used to work in a steel mill in Indiana. So, that's when I would get exposed to people on the ground, because a lot of you talk to the average Bangladeshi Muslim upper 30s, they don't even know any Trump voters, right? I worked with them.
Right.
Right. So I understood at least what their gripes were. And I think that's what you were saying. That's what he appealed to you. That was the thing. He was like, he made it clear that you guys weren't like the average white voter in America wasn't like scrap. It was like, I was gonna like look after you guys.
Yeah.
So
I think that's good.
Yeah. Right.
And I think it did kind of cut through white guilt. And I think if Trump still is popular, I mean, I predict that the popularity starts collapsing, but nevertheless, he still is very popular. And if anything, it's about him fighting, at least he fights. Yeah. The problem is he's not actually doing anything for these people. outside of tweeting. And liberals, I mean, to their credit, they did tell me this, and they were right. He's a liar. It's Trump University all over again. But he gives them the semblance of this. And what I mean by racism is I mean it in the colloquial form of racism. You just hate someone. And this is endemic. It's cheap and easy and meaningless ultimately. And this is absolutely endemic to conservatism, and conservatism arguably couldn't even function without it. I mean, I can remember 5 or 10 years ago on Fox News, they were talking about this pandemic of the knockout game where blacks were going and hitting old white ladies over the head or whatever. Now, first off, some of those that did happen to a certain extent, and obviously, needless to say, they should be prosecuted to the hilt for attacking random people. But what I'm saying is the idea that is like some, pandemic or something is absurd. And they use this, and through something like cable news or through social media, people feel like that's what's happening. And so it's this cheap, just salacious nonsense that is what conservatism is about. It's like, don't vote for the Democrats. You might as well be hitting old granny over the head yourself. And it's that kind of, I mean, you could say it's that polarity, but it's a certain type of polarity. I mean, I think the GOP and conservatives still benefit from this because the left in some ways is so radical that it makes them feel normal in comparison. So, I mean, why are we even talking about like transsexual children? I mean, we have gone so far down this path that we're even discussing this, which would not have been discussed 10 years ago. Now, all a conservative needs to do is say like, oh, they're two genders, blah, 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 hang up a sign that says they're two genders. And, oh, wow, she's for us. She's fighting for us. Well, while Marjorie Taylor Greene is fighting for you, this moron is fighting for you. You are losing at every stage of the game. These conservatives have no ability to stop this train. And that is conservatism in a nutshell, as defined by William F. Buckley in 1955, standing athwart history, yelling, stop. He's almost like a self-deprecating, ironic statement. Yeah, it is not stopped. You have no ability to stop this train, yet you get all this cred for being the one yelling at it. And that is conservatism in a nutshell. It is an absolutely failed ideology. And I don't think it's just failed because it's weak, which it of course is. I think it's actually deeper than that. I think there needs to be that little bit of friction or that resistance in order for this train to keep going in a way. It is, I mean, to drop a phrase, which you can Google or so on, it's caducean. It is a controlled opposition. It is two sides of the same thing. The world is headed in a direction, and there's a right wing and there's a left wing, but it's all ultimately leading to the same destination. And if I'm going to dedicate my life to something, if I'm going to sacrifice things, face adversity, I am not going to face adversity for this, for some illusion of resistance to something, which is no resistance at all.
Sure. So would you say so racism essentially is like when you have vitriol, hatred towards a group?
Yeah.
I feel like what you've been always talking about is some kind of unification upon European values amongst Europeans.
Well, I think we should build Babel, to put it bluntly.
Yeah.
I think that we are long past a time of trying to divide up Europeans, and that we need to build a broader structure that resembles Rome in many ways, but that is an imperial structure that is going to bring about our flourishing, and then really the best of us. Those things that the Bible bashes, I bless. You could say the things that it curses, I bless. I think one should ask why the people that wrote that book were so opposed to a single empire speaking one language.
Sure.
they have their own perspective on that, and I have mine. But we need to pursue a flourishing of our broader people together. And I think also, just, to be honest, geopolitical blocks are the future. Brexit was a bump along the road towards a clear future in terms of technology, communications, language, common ground, etc., towards a kind of supranational organization.
What would you say are the shared values that Europeans share in common with each other that would be like the pillars of, especially in modern day, in the
Right.
21st century? You're kind of like making a pitch, right, to
Right.
your fellow people of European descent, especially now you've removed Christianity from the fold, kind of, because, and
Yeah.
that to me I see that as a big pillar. Like, you look at the Byzantine Empire and they were
It
united.
is. Right.
And that's because that's something that's beyond this world as perceived, if you're a believer, right?
Mhm.
So just curious, what are the values that you would think are the ones that, when you think of a European, what is it, and that you could gather a group of people upon?
Well, I think, first off, to pick up on something you just said, I mean, I think we should pursue eternity in this world. And eternity in this world is our line. It is basically being connected to your ancestors and being connected to your children. And that is eternity. And there is nothing outside of this universe, and there is no life outside of this life. And so I think we need a kind of reconfiguration. I wrote a long article on this that I'm kind of working out into something bigger, but I do think to some extent Europeans are united in their nihilism, and we are kind of the sick man of the world. But we've kind of, in an odd way, kind of come together through this. I think that in terms of pillars, there has to be a state that is generating a people that is both connected to our past, but also is something that is absolutely new. But yeah, that quest for exploration and conquering, even that quest for truth at any cost, but also tempered, you could say, by a quest for home and a quest for small things. I mean, I think those would be the pillar of a state in the future.
I was reflecting upon something you had said in another interview, and you talk about how, like, culture drives, like for example, I think you mentioned, like, I want to say, like, a piece of legislation comes after culture's already, it's the piece of legislation isn't the dividing line. It happens, but way
Right.
before, when culture does it. So it's almost like, if I was your strategist, and I'm kind of thinking about, like, how would you, because Europe is probably more fertile ground for this kind of belief system because of the death of Christianity in Europe. In America, there's still, like, your average, like, white person in America might still be, I don't know, it's hard to say, but like, they always, believe it's
They're
more
clinging
like,
to their Bible, basically.
they are, right? And so it's hard. Like I could feel the disappointment in Jesse Lee Peterson's voice when you told him, like, you weren't really a believer, because he kept probing you on it. And I was like,
I do love that guy. He's a good soul person. Yeah.
But, like, I could just see, I could feel the disappointment in his voice.
Yeah.
And I get it, right? But, like, it seems to be like, if you were to do a fertile ground, like, it'll be like, you go to Europe where there's already, like, the removal of religiosity, right? And then you kind of formulate. But it's almost like
yes, but I think Europe is kind of trapped in its petty nationalism in a way. I think Europe is trapped in the nationalism that emerged after 1919 on the one hand, and after 1945. It's kind of trapped in this nationalism that is in many ways created by the American victory in the Second World War and the First World War, kind of ironically, you could say.
That's true.
So I agree. There probably are. I mean, I look towards Europe in many ways, but I also feel like you kind of have to do this in the belly of the beast. And I'm not going to become some LARPing expat. I mean, I was born in Massachusetts. I grew up in Dallas, Texas. I live in Montana, now, and I'm here. And I think there's, I don't know, just running off to Europe, there's a little bit of cowardly quality to that, you could say.
But the one thing I find refreshing about you is that you're very open about the possibility of America not being America, right?
Oh, yeah.
It's not weird because, like, the thing is, you talk to people. I've been very. I was talking to. I've got these Pentecostal friends of mine, and they're always raving about how America's on a downhill and stuff. I'm like, why don't you guys just bounce, man? Just go somewhere where you can have your own Pentecostal country. You know what I'm saying?
Well, that's a very American thing to do. I mean, that's kind of the original founders of America weren't quite the planters from Virginia, but they were absolutely religious nut jobs who left the oppressive society of Britain to come and create New Jerusalem on these soils. There is something. I mean, in a way, it's like the most American thing to do.
Yeah, but I guess the idea is like every empire sees its day, right?
Exactly, and this has seen its day, and I think I do think that we need to be in a mindset of post America, and I'm not sure we're going to see that in our lifetime. We might see it tomorrow morning, to be honest, because things are fragile. But we might very well see it 50 to 75 or 100 years from now. So, but I do think that we need to kind of see things in that view. Now, I don't think the U.S. is just going to evaporate or something like that. So I think we also need to have a historical mind of understanding that these big structures that it created, a lot of them global structures that has a planetary monetary system, some military structures like NATO, interestingly, might be a European force of the future. But we need to kind of have an eye on history and these structures that exist. I mean, Russia went Bolshevik at one point in time, but the Russian Empire, that imperial structure, remained. And, the Germans, tried to challenge it with the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk, but it ultimately endured. And I think certain important aspects of America are actually going to endure for a century or two, much like the Roman Empire has endured through, Byzantium, which we call it Byzantium. That's like an English thing. They called themselves Rome. These big things can endure. And so I think we need to, like, not just be collapsist in the sense of, oh, this is just going to evaporate. We're all going to be like building campfires and roasting animals, all that kind of, that's nonsense. But I do think that the tensions and contradictions within the American empire are too much for it to bear. And it's gonna go down.
It would be crazy to think that it would just go away. I think what people are failing to want to ignore is that it won't be the world superpower anymore, right? People talk about China already, right? Because you look at the British Empire, like I've never been to the UK. I'm sure the UK is a pretty nice place to live, right?
Of course,
they pretty much have like whatever amenities you need. The Ottoman Empire fell. Turkey's probably is still a nice place to live.
Sure.
So I think that's where people, but I think in America, the base of people that you might be trying to attract, they're still like so tied to this notion of America.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Oh, it's like, problematic. I mean, look, I'm kind of a dissident intellectual at this point because I speak the truth and people don't want to hear the truth. And if I wanted to just wave a flag and wear a red cap and be like, rise, white America, like I would probably be more popular, but I would kind of sell my soul. I just can't do it. And I need to look out for higher things than the status quo. Like maintaining the status quo is just... it's just depressing to think that would be a goal of mine. This seems to be like Tucker Carlson would be like, remember 2011? There was no cancel culture. Antifa wasn't around. Let's go back to this Garden of Eden or whatever. It's just like, give me a break.
Well, I mean, because obviously you had a movement behind you, right? You had the Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville. Would you say, though, that a lot of those folks really didn't understand what you were about?
No, I think that was an interesting thing. I mean, I was invited to speak there, but at that point, I was probably at the peak of my fame slash infamy. And so it was kind of like, oh, let's get Richard Spencer. He's the biggest, bête noir in the world, and blah, blah, blah. And, but yeah, I think that it was very difficult to kind of codify a ideological thrust for the movement, because you had a lot of different people who wanted different things, and there were some people there that were Trump fans. There were some people who came who were maybe libertarians. There were some people who came who were conservationist of statues or whatever. It was just kind of a grab bag, and I think my vision of a way forward is definitely not the one that has won out, at least in the meantime. I mean, my friend Mark Brahman, he'll say this. I mean, it's like you need to judge your followers on quality and not quantity. And that is how I judge things. And that does, invigorate me. There are a lot of people who are starting to think in these directions and getting serious, and people outside of my little bailiwick, I mean, I would include you in that, people who are willing to confront something that's real and affecting us all. But in terms of building a mass movement like that, I think there was a lot of infighting after Charlottesville, but I think when I started to go against Trump, I became kind of their scapegoat. And when I would question things, on a question assumptions, I kind of became their scapegoat. And it is what it is. I mean, I'm happy where I am, and I'm invigorated by what I'm doing, but, I do think, I don't know. I don't know if it were possible to build the kind of movement that we needed to build in that time with those people. I think maybe it wasn't quite meant to be, at least for me.
I mentioned this idea of culture. So in Turkey right now, so you may be familiar with the history of Turkey,
Sure.
being the head of the Ottoman Empire. Recently there's been this phenomenon of like neo-Ottomanism. And where it's coming from is, if you have Netflix, there's a show called Resurrection Ertugrul. It's actually Dirilish Ertugrul. It's a show about the father of the founder of the Ottoman Empire. It's 5 seasons. It's 300 hours of television.
Wow.
It's a lot of TV. And they have a sequel now about the founder of the Ottoman Empire, which it's addictive. And so now here's the thing. I want to, kind of as an example, Turkey they're Turks, but it's also a Muslim country. So what's happening now is that you have Muslims globally who are consuming this like television show about the founding of the Ottoman Empire. It's extremely nostalgic. And I don't know if it's
so it goes into like the fall of Rome, like the fall of Byzantium,
right? Because that's what they're fighting. They're fighting the Mongols and the Byzantines.
Oh, it's like a historical thing. Okay, cool.
Yeah, wow. It's like historical fiction, right? I mean, some of it's stuff because you don't have.
So it glorifies the sacking of Constantinople.
Well, not so. It's before that. It's before that. It's
before that. Okay.
Yeah, it's before, because that happens after the Ottoman Empire is established. But just talking,
sure,
right? So you're talking about like, and so you also have in Turkey right now. So the Turkish government gives I think is given citizenship if you can buy X amount of land, because they have all this land. And so you have a lot of, and Erdogan is seen by many Muslims as like this kind of like caliph figure. Whether that's true or not, I'm saying that's a perception, as he's seen as the most like upstanding Muslim ruler in the world. He speaks out against like atrocities happening to almost, and so you have a lot of like, I'm talking to people in Turkey, you have like British Muslims moving there, American Muslims moving there, and they're following these and creating these sub communities, right? And I think a lot of it is this culture, like you talk about, like it comes because I'm not a Turk, right? But I watch this show Ertugrul and I relate to this dude, or I relate to this struggle, right? Because of that. And you have this shared value system. And so it kind of like, and so to me, honestly, my dream is to move to Istanbul, right? If I could, figure a way to get over there,
my dream is to move to Constantinople.
Yeah.
Right. We'll see who gets there.
Sure. So I think it's like, but it's just an example. It's like because maybe that's like kind of the vision maybe you're looking for. You have some
Yeah,
kind of
I
state.
think this is people. This is natural. This is where things are moving,
Yeah.
and I think the age of the nation state, the nation state is outmoded technology, and it's even more bizarre for Americans to be wanting America to become a nation state or something. It's never been a nation state in its entire history. It's been this weird platform for religious fanatics. It's been a frontier society. It's been an empire. It was maybe a nation state for 25 years. I don't know, between 1925 and 1939 maybe. I
Mhm.
mean, it's that's not what it is. And I think there's this and I think also America kind of has the taste of death in its mouth. I mean, if you look at polling, most Americans think that we're on the right track, and I think and they think that the next generations are going to have it worse off than they have it right now. And I think there's this sense that this is slipping away. And I think with other people, there might be a sense that there's going to be a new opening. And so there are probably, I don't know a lot about China or Chinese culture, but I imagine there's a little bit of imperial longing going on with them, and there's some imperial longing going on with the Ottoman, with people being attracted to the Ottoman Empire. There's this notion that this is where history is pushing us. These dividing lines, these fault lines, are a lot bigger than the nation state, and being a nation state means that you're someone else's pawn. It means you're someone else's bitch, to be
Mhm.
blunt about it. I mean, if you're going to be a nation state at this point, you are going to live in the shadow of an empire. And that is certainly the experience for Western and Central Europe since 1945, or Eastern Europe in the case of the Soviet Union. And I think there's a sense that like maybe there's going to be an opportunity for something bigger and better where we can achieve glory and eternity. And I think that's happening. I mean, even Erdogan's recent move to make Hagia Sophia a mosque again, I
Right.
think was interesting. And I actually, you can go look at my tweet. I'm not lying. I kind of supported it in a way, because that obviously it is a Byzantine church, at its origins, but becoming a museum is almost this kind of like neutering of history in some
Mhm.
ways. It's turning the world into something that like white liberals can go visit on holiday or something, and becoming a mosque, it's getting back in touch with eternity. It's kind of re-entering history. And I think that's actually a positive thing.
Yeah.
I think it's showing that this end of history dream is fading,
It,
and
it,
that's
it
good.
it's almost like people have we if we're being honest with ourselves. So I'll tell you a personal anecdote. A year ago at this time, I was on vacation in southern Spain, which used to be
Mm-hmm.
Andalusia, which was Muslim until
Yeah.
con- the Reconquisition, right? And so I remember we were in Granada, where the Alhambra Palace, it's a tourist site now. It used to be like this big palace of the Nasrid dynasty. I want to say I can't recall, but
Mm-hmm.
you're not allowed to like pray. Even though there's like Arabic and like
Mm-hmm.
Allah written all over the place, but you can't pray. You can't do anything there, right? Um, and then later that night you see like there's a mosque they just recently built that's like first mosque built in Granada in like hundreds of years. It overlooks the Alhambra, and some Spanish girl converted to Islam, and it's
Mm-hmm.
like she's going because of her ancestors. I guess she had looked into it. You see this phenomenon in Spain, right? And I remember then I went to Sevilla, and Sevilla had their massive cathedral used to be a mosque,
Yeah.
right? And I remember walking up. My wife and my kids were getting ice cream, and I walked away and I went to the where the minaret is, and I said
Yeah.
a prayer that I want to like restore this to Muslim rule, right?
Mm-hmm.
So and a Spaniard today would be offended by that, but I'm like, listen, that's what I want, and I think people aren't being honest. Like, I mean, like if we're just being like, I'm listen, man. If that's what you want, that's what you want. Like, I
Yeah.
don't
I
think why.
respect your desire for that, which is I find badass. So, yeah. And look, white culture has created only emptiness. It has turned cathedrals and mosque into museums
Mhm.
through our own spiritual decay and our own fascination with liberalism, etc.
Right.
And I think that is a greater enemy, and the sense that returning a lot of these things into mosque is allowing them to re-enter history and re-enter real open kind of power dynamics and a connection to history and eternity. And I think that is absolutely positive thing. And I think that so many people are just questing for you could say identity, but it's also just kind of meaning. I mean, the American white liberal world does not offer anything to that Spanish woman who converted to Islam. It offers her, oh, you might be able to get a job one day in a cubicle and, get rich and go on vacation or something. That's all it offers.
Be a cog in the corporate machine, basically.
Exactly. And
Right.
Islam offers meaning, and Islam offers eternity. And that will ultimately win.
Mm-hmm. You and Edward Dutton, I think, had made you had met Louis Farrakhan, apparently.
Oh, okay.
I actually want to I want to take a segue and kind of go there, because I definitely want to get a feel for that.
Okay, so I was Louis Farrakhan's neighbor for a time when I was at
you
UFC.
lived in Hyde Park.
Exactly.
Okay.
I recently, I guess I could go find a photo. So Ed and I met up in Chicago in the spring of 2019, and we actually, one of the things we did is we visited UFC, because he was University of Chicago. He was just kind of curious about
what year were you at UFC?
University.
Because I actually lived in Hyde Park for 4 years.
2002, 2003.
Oh, you predated me, because my wife was in the residency program at the hospital, and I was there from 10 to 14. So I remember Farrakhan's house. You drive, but there's always some dude in a bow tie standing outside.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right.
But I lived in this little apartment I shared with a couple of people. I was a impoverished graduate student.
Sure.
And but I actually met him at a time when there was a function. I think it was a function that he had, and kind of on a bit of a kind of LARP, we went, and I met him, and I said, "Oh, I'm your neighbor, and I respect you," and so on. I doubt he remembers it, but it's real. Then Ed and I were in back in Chicago in 2019, and we were visiting the university, and we actually walked up to visit my old apartment, which is this nostalgia fest. Mm-hmm. And then we actually visited his mosque that was near actually the old state fairgrounds area. There was a converted Orthodox church
on Stony Island.
Yes.
Okay, the Mosque Mariam. Yeah, right.
Yes. And it was a very interesting experience, because we rolled up, and it was one Chicagoan who was hanging out with us, and it was Ed and I, and we rolled up and we walked up, and they were a bit freaks. Like they sent out someone to talk to us, like a emissary, and they're like, "What are you doing here?" And we're like, "Look, we come in peace. We're just interested." And then they sent someone who was part of the school.
And they had no idea who you were. They
had no idea who Richard Spencer was. No,
okay.
No. I told them afterward, because we started a conversation, and I think they probably did get this at some point. Like someone would come in and then start like trolling them or egging them on. We weren't. We were like reaffirming them and saying, this is great what you have going on here. And we had we spent a couple hours there, and I hesitate to mention this. I'm not trying to bash them at all, but we were walking down one area, and we saw some of the effects of corporal punishment. There was a paddle laying down. It was, oh wow, you guys are serious at this school. And we saw some of the students, and then they gave us bean pies. And so it was quite an experience. Yeah.
Interesting.
I gave them all my contact information. We were actually texting a little bit, just people from the school, but
yeah.
I think I think it would be a very productive dialogue.
Yeah. I was in Miami, Florida a few weeks back. The last episode I released on my channel, years are going to be a few after, but was I interviewed a guy who was Farrakhan's like a close companion of his, He wouldn't call
Mm-hmm.
him his right hand man, but he traveled with him. He cut his hair. He's the one to give him his hairstyle. He's 85 years
Interesting.
old now. This guy, I met him in Miami. I found him in Miami. But yeah, but like one of the reasons I wanted to have this dialogue with you because, as you may know, Louis Farrakhan does not represent Orthodox Islam, right?
No, no, no.
So I was like, and I think the problem in our community as Muslims, I want to talk is that like I mean, I view this interview as like, because listen, I don't do this for a living. I'm an engineer.
Mm-hmm.
You know, my job isn't going to be threatened by doing an interview with you. But
Mm-hmm.
it's like I don't understand how people can expect for people to like if part of our job is outreach, whether that's dawah for proselytizing, for conversion, or even
Mm-hmm.
educating people just so we have an understanding, like if they're not willing to talk to you and you're going to go to Louis Farrakhan, you're going to get a skewed version of Islam. Or like Jordan Peterson recently had like Ayaan Hirsi Ali on, right?
Oh God, she's
You
just
know,
a neocon,
you know,
basically. She's a
yeah.
neocon in
But like,
blackface,
and I was
basically.
telling someone, I was in a WhatsApp
Yeah,
group with these guys, and they were like harping, like, I can't believe you guys love Peterson, etc. I
yeah.
don't really read his stuff to be honest. It never,
Mm-hmm.
I listened to a couple of chapters of the audiobook. It didn't really like, other than making my bed, that whole
I
part.
listened to like an hour of the audiobook. I did the exact same thing.
Yeah,
We had the exact experience. I was just like, all right, this is
yeah.
this is pretty cloudy and
Yeah,
muddled. Yeah.
and I see that. I mean, listen, he helps people out. You see him like teenage kids. That seems to be a lot of the audience that resonate with him. But I think
Yeah,
that
yeah, and he can be kind of in his way. To
yeah,
be overly fair, perhaps he
sure,
can sometimes be interesting when he's talking about Jung or Freud or something like that. Like I think he is a bit of an intellectual.
yeah,
I think he got Slavoj Žižek wiped the floor with him in a debate, and I think a lot of that was coming from the fact that Peterson is kind of good at a niche. Like he's kind of interesting if he's talking about Freud or something, but then in terms of a overall worldview or something, he just has none, and therefore someone like Zizek can just get him on the ropes.
yep. So I remember, and these guys are griping about Peterson having Ayaan Hirsi Ali on, etc. It's like, how
Mm-hmm.
can you guys? And I was like, listen, this is our fault because I'll tell you why. Jordan Peterson was invited to the Reviving the Islamic Spirit conference in Toronto, Canada, which is one of the
Interesting.
largest Islamic conferences in North America.
Mm-hmm.
You get about 20, 30,000 people there. This is maybe like 2017. And then like all of a sudden his invite got rescinded.
Mm.
And it probably because you have like this leftist push in the Muslim community that were like, oh, Peterson's an Islamophobe, white supremacist, XYZ. And I'm like how are you gonna expect to get anywhere if you only talk to one side? And
Yeah.
the challenge with like when you're talking to people on the left, like are we telling them that what Muslims think about like LGBTQ or what other issues or salvific exclusivity, things of that sort, right? I mean, because this idea that everything is, you know, everyone can be right. Like, no, we don't believe that. We have like a very I mean, people could say it's a dogmatic worldview, right? That's kind of black and
Yeah.
white in a way. We won't say, oh, so and so, you're going to hell because we don't know that. But we
Right.
say that, hey, what we believe is the truth. And,
Right.
it is what it is. And if you believe this, then we believe you're wrong.
Yeah. Well, I felt that so in my career,
Yeah.
from early on, I would there would sometimes be like a article written on me or something in the press or CNN or Rachel Maddow. I remember freaked out about me at one point. Actually, when I got in a verbal sparring match with this Randy Schweerman, who I made fun of him. He was out here. I don't think he lives here anymore. I happened to be on a chairlift with him, and I learned who he was, and I knew who he was exactly. He's this neocon stooge, and I just kind of like just read him the riot act basically, and he got really pissed off, and then he challenged me to a fight at one point, and it was at this cocktail party. And I absolutely did not back down. I was just being like, Randy, are you serious here. And they wrestled him and took him out of the room, and they allowed me to stay. So I won. And that, needless to say, infuriated him beyond belief. But I remember Rachel Maddow doing something on that and blah, blah, blah. But I wasn't connected with other people. I think there was this brief moment in time where, because the alt-right was blowing up in the media and there was this liberal freakout, and I was kind of you could say I was kind of a bête noire. I was kind of this, like, I don't know what to say, this like icon of the craziness that is 2016. And so, but one of the good things about that was that I was talking to more people, and we were having conversations. Now, sometimes, on the college tour and stuff like that, the conversations were a little too much like shouting matches. And I'm glad this is nothing of that kind.
Yeah.
But I was getting invited on podcasts and so on. And I think after Charlottesville, there was a kind of hardening of the do not ever talk to him. And I knew this is before Charlottesville. I was banned from Fox News. You cannot mention Richard Spencer on Fox News. That was someone working at Fox News told me that. But I got that, and I got kind of the cold shoulder, you could say. I think now, I think temperatures are lowering, and I think that is good, because we had this experience a few years ago. We're now kind of in a new place. I think that I have been able to at least, one of the reasons, not the only one, for voting for Biden was just saying, like, look, I don't want to be a part of that. And I actually do want to talk to you. And I actually do think that there's some interesting common ground, or at the very least, we can have a really interesting discussion. And I want you to listen to me. I don't want to shout at you so much that you can't hear what I'm saying, if you understand. And I think even this in its small way is kind of like a new beginning in that. And this is where I want to go.
Right. Well, yeah, but would certainly appreciate it. I think that the challenge that we find is that people are just so damn lazy that, so they'll call Mike Cernovich a white supremacist.
Right.
Yeah. And Mike Cernovich is, because it's so lazy that anyone who supported Trump in 2016 is in this box. And then you see personalities, and they're like, okay, well, your traditional Republicans, the Lindsey Grahams and McConnells, of course, they're Republicans. But you talk about Cernovich and Milo, and, you have the red pill bro community, all in one thing, right?
Yeah.
I'm like, no, man, everybody's, and I'm like, that's the thing. You actually talk to people, and you find out where they agree and where they disagree. And sometimes we're at fault ourselves because we're still fleshing our views out. And so what they get is what you are at that moment. But the problem is I'm 39, you're a couple years older than me. Our views are going to be changing.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And we should be allowed to have that freedom.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. And this is where, I think yelling about or complaining about cancel culture has gotten a little bit overdone, but I do think that it is at the heart of cancel culture is a really big problem. And that is just the canceling and erasing of someone and not allowing them to grow or evolve. I am sure I have not renounced anything that I have said over my career. I have evolved. Absolutely. I'm not here to say, oh, I'm a liberal now, democracy, free speech. No, I'm not like that, but I have evolved and I have changed and I have recognized that certain things that I did were wrong. And you have to allow someone to grow. And just this puritanical canceling is absolutely hostile to human flourishing.
Okay, so I got to ask you, do you still believe that college football should be banned?
Yes. We need to take away that. You should agree with me. We need to take away that false religion that people have.
I believe, some people think Ohio State's my religion.
Yeah.
What happens to me is, if you ever look for me on Facebook, you can't so what happens is my first name starts with Maheen. Like
Hmm.
we have a rivalry, and people are gonna grill me because I'm essentially. It looks I'm wearing University of Michigan colors, but really this is black.
Right.
This is black,
That would be.
and this is a French logo, Champion de France. It's a French rugby. Okay,
Well,
so
you can say what you want. I'm sure you're a secret Michigan Wolverine fan. Yeah.
but
I mean,
like
is that worse than converting to Christianity, perhaps?
you know what? It was funny, man, because like it came up. I was having dinner with some guys a few years back, and this guy asked me at the time I only had one daughter, and this guy asks me, and he's like, what would you do if your daughter goes to like Michigan? And then I was like, I just replied to him, I was like, what are you gonna do if you become an apostate?
Is this an honor killing situation?
Yeah, I was like, and right away it was like, and the other guys there, they're like, man, you just upped the ante real quick. I was like, because we don't talk about that. Like my daughter going to Michigan or marrying somebody from the University of Michigan, it's just not an option.
Yeah.
Right. But like,
I get it. I mean, yeah, my I wanted to provoke. I said that in Auburn. I really wanted to provoke them because I was like, look at this toxic religion that you are a part of and start to question it. I think that might have been the most controversial thing I said. That really like made them freak out. But I do think that college football, I mean, football in general, I played it when I was in high school, and again, mediocre athlete, but I'm glad I played. I think I learned something about myself. You learn by losing. You learn sometimes by getting your ass kicked. And that happens really, in a real way on the football field. So I'm glad I did it. And I do still follow the NFL a bit. I'm kind of a self-hating fan. But I would say that I think that college football in particular really has a toxic aspect to it. In the Major League Baseball, if you're good in high school and they think you might be something, they give you some money as a signing bonus. You get paid to play minor league baseball. And if it doesn't work out, which is the case of 99 out of 100, it doesn't work out. And you've had this experience. With college football, they are bringing in these people, not paying them anything. Sometimes they get some money under the table. The programs are multi-million, billion-dollar industry program. And it's become this weird, particularly in the South, this kind of weird religion. I mean, I don't know if I would associate it even. I know you might associate with nationalism. You could associate with like Christianity in this way. It's become this thing for them, and so I do think this will probably. I think the college football industry will probably end. At least we won't recognize it where it is eventually.
Well,
and if you add head injuries into the mix,
yeah.
I mean, if a guy wants to go out. I have no problem with men risking their life. Like if you want to be an extreme skier or play football, like you're a hero in my book. Mm-hmm. But you go in and you get head injuries and you're earning money for Dabo Sweeney and you end up with like brain damage. I mean, look, this is a bit toxic.
I as an outsider, if I'm going to be objective, if I'm an outsider, because my wife thinks I'm crazy too. Like she grew up in Mississippi, right?
Yeah.
And in the Mississippi, though, it's a Bengali girl grows up in Mississippi, but it's like she's familiar. The University of Alabama is just like an hour away, an hour and a half away from where she grew up. But it was just like, she's almost like, it's a little too much. She's okay with it because I'm not like, I don't have any other vices really.
Yeah, sure.
But like
if football's your vice, that's fine.
But I think that there's this. As an outsider, like I can tell, like people tell me, like it's not normal. Like I change my name on Facebook every year during Michigan week because we have to cancel the M's out, and you can't use the X emoji on Facebook, so I gotta change my name. I usually switch it to Arabic.
Wow.
And that way for 90 days.
That's pretty insane. Yeah.
No,
I think I'm insane. I'm not that insane.
Right. So I think that's but I get it. And now they have
And the
the
racial element. I mean,
yeah,
let's also talk about this because I
sure.
mean, particularly in SEC,
Yeah.
you have 80 to 90% African American teams,
Mm,
and you have these white fans. It's kind of the good old boy fan rooting on people that they would kind of never want to allow in their house.
yep.
And there is I mean, a lot of people notice this. I mean, they're liberals are probably the most who notice this the most. There is a toxic element to that, and so I think at the very least we should recognize it. But as an honest person, I'll admit I do follow the NFL a bit, and on Sundays I just have this Pavlovian response to watch the Cowboys lose.
Hey, at least you were alive during some Super Bowl champ titles. I
Oh,
mean,
I was alive in the glory days.
yeah,
I loved Jimmy Johnson and Troy Aikman
yeah,
and Emmitt Smith and all that, and that was amazing.
yeah,
And yeah, I mean that was amazing as a kid to be alive, and they're just like these great games. I mean, the games against San Francisco
yeah, right,
are just classic. I mean, the Super Bowls were just blowouts.
right,
But those games against like Steve Young in San Francisco, I think 1992,
yeah,
those are classic games.
right.
Jimmy was this, pretty amazing guy, just a total madman. And I remember there was one story where they lost and they lost in Philadelphia or something. They're flying back and he didn't allow his team to eat dinner. He took away the dinner because they weren't like appreciating the loss. And
Right.
yeah, it is pretty cool. So yeah, I don't know. There is something about, I think the good aspects of the NFL or football in general is just that archetypal, war game, you could say team sport, where you are going to battle and you're risking your health for glory.
Mhm.
And I do think that there is something archetypal about that I still do like.
Sure.
And I like baseball too, but there's something about football, there's just kind of imagery of,
Mhm.
I don't know, like Joe Montana leaving the field after he got, hit in the Giants game and not knowing if he could play again. And there's something kind of tragic and heroic about that and coming back,
Right.
and I don't know, there is, I get it why you're a sportsman, or you in general,
Yeah.
why people are a sports fanatic. I think it does appeal to something that's positive.
I think for college, because Ohio State's my alma mater, it's
Yeah.
like, that's where I got my degree from. I use my degree for my livelihood. I make that connection too, right? It's that
Sure.
sense of school spirit. Before we wrap up, Richard, is there anything you want to talk about, cover, or any final message to the audience?
No, I think this is a great conversation.
Yeah,
We can just leave it on football.
right. Well, I'm glad we were able to do this. I am excited to get some of the reaction.
Yeah.
And I think that it is what it is. I mean,
I think there's going to be a good reaction. I think particularly that we went kind of deep and philosophical early, so I think there's going to be some food for thought for
it's
first 15 minutes or so.
That's usually not, and that's not my specialty. It's more like, I'm gonna have to go back and like do some homework and kind of read some stuff. If you have anything that we can maybe provide folks for the show notes, you can certainly pass them on to me. And how can people find out? Like, I guess you can Google you, but where can they? Is there a way they can find your current stuff? Because
radixjournal.com, you can find current stuff, and I'm mostly focusing on books. So we've got that is what I'm doing most of my editing on right now, and I have a couple of interesting things coming up, but I won't mention those right now. But I also do a weekly podcast as well and live stream kind of thing. So those will all be available at Radix. And I banned from YouTube, but I think Odyssey is the kind of place where I'm going towards now.
Can you spell Radix?
Radix.
Radix. Cool.
Yes.
All right. Sounds good. All right. For listeners out there, if you have any questions, comments, or hate mail after this episode, you can email me at info@sultansandsneakers.com. You can follow me on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For my special guest, Richard Spencer, I'm your host, Mahin the Podcaster, signing off.